Alright guys, welcome back, and in this episode we'll be going over the Week 6 game predictions for the 2025-2026 NFL season, and let's get right into things. Week 5 recap, I had a brutal Week 5, I gotta be better, I was 4-9, my worst week by far, and once again, my lock of the week was wrong, so if I'm not mistaken, the new giveaway pot at the end of the year is up to $75. So just a reminder, if you want a chance at the giveaway at the end of the year, just make sure you're subscribed, you like the videos, and you comment on at least one of the videos. And the more comments you have, the better chances you have to win the money. And it's free money, so just make sure you like, subscribe, and comment, and you will have a chance to win. All right, and the Week 5 Player of the Week for last week is Rico Dowdle. He finished with 23 carries for 206 rushing yards and a touchdown, and most importantly, a win. Rico Dowdle was dominant last week, stepping in for Chuba Hubbard while he was injured. He might get a chance this week as well. I don't know if Chuba Hubbard's going to play, but he was a focal point on the offense, man. He ran all over the Dolphins defense, shredded them, and it was just a no-brainer for him to be player of the week. And then for fantasy football, my start of the week for week 6 is Tucker Kraft against Cincinnati. They give up the most points PPR-wise against tight ends, and he's been playing like a top 5 tight end this year. And Tucker Kraft has had multiple chances to get touchdowns, but he's just missed and got tackled before the goal line multiple times. So I expect him to have a big week in week 6. The Bengals give the most points to tight ends in PPR formats, and I think he's just a must start. I think the Packers are going to dominate the Bengals, and I think Tucker Kraft has a good chance of scoring a touchdown against the weak Bengals linebackers. All right, and then let's get right into the games. The first game, we have Thursday Night Football. We have the Eagles versus the Giants, and the Giants secondary is one of the worst secondaries in the league. And going over to the Eagles, this is a game where I can see improvement in the Eagles' offense. The Giants' improvements in the offseason to their secondary hasn't really shown off so far and hasn't paid off. Paulson Adebo and Javon Holland haven't made too big of impacts for the team. And the Giants' offense also struggles to get open versus man, especially without Malik Neighbors. And I think that's where one of the Eagles' strengths on defense is. They excel, and they're top 5 in completion percentage over expected. So I think Philly's defense is going to be too much for rookie quarterback Jackson Dart. I like storylines for the NFL, so Saquon Barkley's returning back to New York once again, and I think he can have a big statement game this week. He's had a solid year, but he hasn't had a dominant year, and I think this is going to be one of his breakout games. He's at 267 rushing yards. It's been solid so far, but he's definitely not as good as he was last year. That's hard to top, but I think this could be one of the weeks where he makes a statement game against the Giants. Big storyline returning to New York again, and I can also see Jalen Hurts throwing the ball all over New York secondary. Give me the Eagles in this week 6 matchup. All right, next up we have the Broncos versus the Jets, the 9:30 game. Make sure you guys wake up in time for that game. The Broncos just pulled off a big win against the Eagles, their best win of the year so far. And I can see them adding another one in the winning column. The Jets defense ranks like bottom 10 in most defensive stats throughout 5 weeks. They give up about 31 points per game, and they are the 27th worst defense in EPA per play. And the Jets also have the worst turnover differential in the league with -8 and have one of the worst red zone defenses in the league. So I think New York's margin of error in this game is going to be very slim. And the Broncos just held the Philly offense to 17 points last week. So it's hard to pick against Denver in this matchup. I think they're getting hot right now. Like I just said, they had their biggest win of the season so far. And I think they're going to make it hard for Justin Fields to move the ball on the field. And I think Breece Hall's going to struggle against that Broncos D-line. So for that reason, give me the Denver Broncos in this Week 6 matchup. All right, next up we have the Rams versus the Ravens. Now the Ravens, as you can tell, are dealing with a bunch of injuries on both sides of the ball. Without Lamar Jackson, I think this team lacks an identity. They struggled to run the ball last week against Houston, and their defense couldn't stop anything. Sean McVay is one of the better coaches at attacking mismatches and going after your team's weakness. It just seemed like the Ravens lacked effort, and that's worrisome. They're 1-4. On the verge of going 1-5. My panic meter is already through the roof, and it's hard to flip the switch in 1 week, and I think McVay will be able to exploit the weaknesses in this matchup. And with all the injuries to Baltimore, I think it's just too much to overcome this early on in the season. For that reason, I'm picking the Rams to win this matchup. I think the Rams offense have a big game this week. With the lack of effort on the Ravens defense, I think the Rams can win it anyway. So give me the Rams in this Week 6 matchup. All right, next up we have the Carolina Panthers versus the Dallas Cowboys. I think Carolina is a very slow-paced team, and I think they always seem to be playing from behind in every single game. The Dallas offense is one of the better offenses in the league. And I don't know if that's always because they're playing in shootouts because of their poor secondary or what. Dallas, we can't deny, is putting up over 400 yards per game. And Dak Prescott has his highest career completion percentage. And although the Cowboys defense isn't good, I think the Carolina Panthers defense is just as bad. They rank dead last in defensive success rate. And if the Panthers have to play from behind and play catch up this week, I think it's going to be too much for them to overcome. I think the Cowboys offense is clicking on all cylinders even without CeeDee Lamb. And the potential of getting him back this week, I just have to pick Dallas. I just think their offense is going to put up more points. And I even trust their defense a little bit more, which isn't saying much with how bad both defenses are in this matchup. But give me the Dallas Cowboys in this Week 6 matchup. All right, next up we have the Arizona Cardinals versus the Colts. And I think this can be a sneaky close game. I like how this Colts team this year so far has been able to handle their business. We all expect them to beat the Las Vegas Raiders last week, but not in that dominant blowout fashion. The Colts offense is one of the best in the league. Daniel Jones is looking like a top 10 quarterback this season. Jonathan Taylor has been playing at offensive player of the year type level so far. And he's honestly playing like the best running back in the league. Like he has something to prove. And the Cardinals feel like one of the most inconsistent teams on a week-to-week basis. One week they look like a top 10 team, and then the next week they look like a bottom 10 team. Part of that is just honestly due to Kyler Murray's inconsistent play at quarterback. I don't know if this is going to be one of the games where the Cardinals come out looking good or not, but I like the Colts to win. I think their quick tempo offense with Daniel Jones getting the ball in 2.3 seconds on average, I think it's going to help the offense get in the rhythm, and Kyler Murray's bottom 5 in explosive pass rate this year. So if the Cardinals are playing from behind and having to come back, I just think the Colts offense and defense are just better and more of a well-rounded team. And I just can't trust the Cardinals to consistently be a good team. So for that reason, give me the Colts in this Week 6 matchup. All right, next up we have the Seattle Seahawks versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars just had a huge win on Monday night against the Kansas City Chiefs. However, it just didn't feel that convincing to me. At the end of the day, like I said, a win is a win. But Jacksonville just doesn't feel like a strong 4-1 team. It took a 99-yard pick six and the stumbling quarterback sneak to beat the Chiefs. And I don't want to discredit the Jaguars, but I just prefer the Seattle Seahawks over them right now. I think the Seahawks are one of the most well-balanced teams. Their offense is 4th best in EPA, and their defense has the best defensive EPA. The Seattle Seahawks defense also forces a negative play on about 35% of their snaps. And I just think Sam Donnan has been playing like one of the better quarterbacks in the league. And I just think Seattle's defense will be able to neutralize Jacksonville's rushing attack with Travis Etienne. And I think Jacksonville tries to attack the short passing, and I think they're going to be able to neutralize that as well. And the Jaguars also ranked bottom 10 in explosive plays. So for that reason, I'm taking the team that I think is more well-rounded. All right, next up, we have the Chargers versus the Miami Dolphins. And honestly, initially, I wanted to pick the upset here and pick the Dolphins because I just think the Chargers offense, it may take a little bit of time to adjust to their new identity. They can't run the ball as efficiently anymore without Najee Harris and now Amari Hampton for a couple weeks. And they also don't have their 2 top tackles in Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater. However, after thinking about it, I just think that Justin Herbert is more than capable to lead the offense with the receiving core of Vlad, Keenan Allen, and Quentin Johnston. Now going over to Miami, I think their offense is very unique. And they're an offense that takes what the defense is giving them, but with the speed in the Miami offense, and I think they have the ability to get points in big chunk plays. And Miami is a top 10 team in passing efficiency despite being 1-4. But my biggest worry about Miami is their defense, specifically their secondary. And it also doesn't help that Miami gives up about 29 points per game, and their defense is bottom 10 in most statistical categories like EPA per play and yards per play allowed and defensive success rate. So although the Chargers dealing with a bunch of injuries like Amari Hampton, Joe Alt, Rashawn Slater, I just think Justin Herbert's going to be able to cover up the holes, and I'm picking the LA Chargers to win this Week 6 matchup. All right, next up, we have the Cleveland Browns versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mike Tomlin is one of the best coaches when facing rookie quarterbacks, and he's also one of the better coaches coming out of the bye week. And I think this is naturally going to be a close game. This is how all AFC North games go. And it's showing that Joe Flacco's here, but on Tuesday he was traded. So now they're going to be having rookie quarterback Dylan Gabriel starting for a second week in a row. But like I said, I think this is going to be naturally a close game. This is how AFC North games go. And I think it's going to be a one-possession game for the most part. I think that both defenses in this matchup could excel. Pittsburgh's potentially going to be getting Alex Highsmith and Joey Porter back. But going over the defenses, Steelers' O-line worries me against Myles Garrett and the rest of the Browns' D-line, who's been playing at a high level right now, especially with the lack of mobility of Aaron Rodgers. The same can be said about the Steelers' D-line going against rookie quarterback Dylan Gabriel. But I think this game's going to come down to the wire. But if it's going to be a close game, I'm taking the veteran quarterback in Aaron Rodgers to take out the Cleveland Browns and Dylan Gabriel. So give me the Pittsburgh Steelers to win this Week 6 matchup. Next up, we have the New England Patriots versus the Saints. The Patriots are one of the hottest teams in the league right now after picking up a big win against arguably the best team in the league in the Bills. And Drake May is looking better and better as the season goes on. And on the other hand, Spencer Rattler's actually been pretty solid this year too. Even though the Saints record doesn't reflect that, I just think since Spencer Rattler's been taking care of the ball, only one interception, has a pretty high completion percentage. But going into my prediction, I know it's going to sound crazy, but I'm actually going to pick the New Orleans Saints Week 6 matchup. The Saints allow less big plays. They have a very solid run defense. And I think their offense is better than people expect. I think Kellen Moore's offensive identity is to play very conservative and run the ball, play a turnover-free game. The Saints are one of the worst teams when it comes to air yards, but they play so conservative. I can see this being a close game coming down to the stretch, and I can just very well see Ramondre Stevenson or one of their other players fumbling and costing them the game. And with Mike Vrabel not wanting to play Travion Henderson over Ramondre Stevenson yet, I don't know why, even though Ramondre Stevenson has fumbled the ball and cost so many possessions. I just think it can cost later down the stretch. So give me the upset in this matchup. After a big win for the Patriots, I'm picking the New Orleans Saints in this Week 6 matchup. All right, next up, we have the Titans versus the Raiders. And quite frankly, I think this is a perfect game for Geno Smith and the Raiders offense to have a bounce-back week. I think where the Raiders can edge out this game is from a big Max Crosby game. The Titans O-line isn't the best. And when Cam Ward holds on the ball for 2.8 seconds, which ranks back half of the league, I think naturally Max Crosby can create some pressure and force a turnover from Cam Ward. I think this can be a big offensive game for the Raiders, which they need with the high expectations after getting Geno Smith in the offseason. But one of their top targets in Brock Bowers is currently injured, and his status is up in the air for the Sunday's game. The Raiders are currently 28th in offensive EPA per play and have a 52% touchdown percentage in the red zone, which ranks 20th. So I think the Raiders need to win this matchup, and they need a big offensive week to kickstart. And Geno Smith needs to stop turning over the ball. He has 9 interceptions and only 6 touchdowns. So I think Geno Smith is going to have a big bounce-back week, and I'm picking the Las Vegas Raiders to win. All right, next up, we have the 49ers versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I expect this to be a great game. The Bucs just pulled off a great win against the Seahawks on the road in Week 5, and they're a very hot team right now. Tampa's offense is one of the better offenses in the league, and their offense has the ability to score on the ground or through the air. And I think the Bucs' defensive struggles is more in their secondary, where opposing teams' top receivers always seem to have a pretty big game. For example, Jackson Smith and Jigba last week and Garrett Wilson a couple weeks ago. But with the uncertainty of Ricky Pearsall or Jawan Jennings or Brock Purdy playing, I feel pretty good about Tampa's secondary in this matchup. Christian McCaffrey's been an elite receiving back this year, where I think he can have another big game. And I can see CMC having another big game through the air, but he's been a poor runner. And I think Tampa's run defense is the strength of the defense. CMC can't run, and both of the Niners' top receiving options are out, and potentially the starting quarterback. I have to take the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in this Week 6 matchup. All right, next up we have the Bengals versus the Green Bay Packers. And like I alluded to earlier, the Bengals made a big trade and traded for Joe Flacco yesterday to try to salvage their season and stay in playoff contention until Joe Burrow comes back. I honestly respect the front office for not throwing in the towel for the season and actually trying to get better on offense, because obviously Jake Browning was not the solution, and he could not move the ball. And although Joe Flacco isn't some elite quarterback, I think he vastly improves the outlook of the Bengals offense. Joe Flacco just played the Green Bay Packers defense a couple weeks ago, but if we're being honest, Joe Flacco didn't have that good of a performance against Green Bay. It was more the defense holding off the Packers offense. But I think the Packers defense is ready for Flacco again. They had him with only 13 points last game, and with the Packers having one of the best defenses in the league, and their offense one of the best offenses in the league, they're a very well-rounded team. And I think the Packers are going to have a very high scoring affair in this matchup. So for that reason, give me the Green Bay Packers. But I'm very interested to see how the new look Bengals offense looks with Joe Flacco at helm until Joe Burrow hopefully comes back sooner than expected, because I think this Bengals team has potential. They were 2-1 before Joe Burrow went down, but give me the Packers in this Week 6 matchup. All right, next up we have the Detroit Lions versus the Chiefs. And if I'm being honest with Chiefs fans, they just look like a different team this year. And I don't know if that's due to the fact of them not having Rashee Rice back yet, or maybe they're just not as dominant as they used to be. That Week 5 matchup against Jacksonville was a game where the Chiefs had to win. It felt like a game they should have won. And it came down to this stretch, but I just think the biggest issue after watching that game is the defense. The defense couldn't stop the Jaguars when it mattered. And going over to the Lions, they've won 4 in a row, are a very hot team right now. And I'm just afraid that the Lions might be too much for the Chiefs to handle. I think the Chiefs' run defense is very solid, so I think they're going to be able to limit Jahmyr Gibbs to a certain extent. But that pass defense is where I could see the Lions taking advantage of. And I just think the Lions are trending in the right direction, and they're not going to be able to stop the Detroit passing attack. So I hate to do this, but for that reason, I'm picking the Lions and the Chiefs to now go to 2-4. All right, next up we have the Buffalo Bills versus the Falcons. And after a tough, close loss against New England on Sunday Night Football, I think the Bills are itching to come out and prove to us that they're still a top team. And this is my lock of the week. I think the Falcons' defense is going to have trouble, and they're going to have their hands full to try to stop Josh Allen, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Atlanta's defense allows 109 rushing yards per game. However, they played one less game since they were on bye last week. So in reality, they're giving up about 130 rushing yards per game. And I think since James Cook didn't have that great of a game against the New England Patriots in Week 5, I think this is a big bounce back game for him. Going over to the Bills' defense, I think their pass defense is a little shaky, given they give up 150 yards to Stephon Diggs and they give 40 points against the Ravens in Week 1. So I can see Drake London having a big game. But this is my lock of the week, and I'm picking the Bills. And I think the Bills' offense is going to embarrass the Falcons' defense. So I'm taking the Bills as my lock of the week in this Week 6 matchup, and hopefully I don't curse this game for Bills fans. It just seems like all my lock of the weeks are wrong. So let's hope this one's right, but if not, we're up to $100 in the pot. But give me the Bills in this matchup. All right, and this is the last game of the week. This is the second game of the doubleheader on Monday night. We have the Bears versus the Commanders. The Commanders look very solid, and they had a big win against the Chargers in Week 5. And Jaden Daniels is finally back, and there's a chance that Terry McLaurin might play this week too. So I think the Commanders are finally getting healthier and are about to be at full strength. However, going over to the Bears, I think they've looked objectively better than they did last year, which is good. Any improvement for the Bears is good. However, the Bears' defense is what worries me. I think without Jalen Johnson, I think that's where Jaden Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury can pick apart that secondary. And with all their injuries they're dealing with, Bill Krosky-Merritt broke out last week, and I can see him having another big game against the Chicago Bears D-line. And although I respect the Chicago offense, however, I just can't see that Chicago defense holding up against the Washington offense, especially if they get back Terry McLaurin. I think Deebo Samuel's played amazing so far this season. And like I said, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt has finally broke out. So for that reason, I just think the Commanders are getting hot and getting healthier. So give me the Commanders in this final Week 6 matchup. All right, guys, that wraps up the Week 6 game predictions. And like I said earlier in the episode, hopefully we have a way better record than we did Week 5. That was a terrible week, and hopefully I will never go 4-9 again. And hopefully my lock of the week's right for my sake. But like I said, if not mistaken, the prize pot's up to $75. So please subscribe and comment. The more comments you make, the better chance you have to win the big giveaway at the end of the year. And thanks for staying tuned, and I'll see you guys next week.